I am here today with Dr. Eric Novotny, an old professor of mine from American University and a collaborator on a new project that we've been working on together. But I wanted to have you on today, Eric, as the first guest of our new show, because you have probably been the singular most important person on my journey of education around cybersecurity and privacy and kind of the excitement of this world, but also the dangers and the fears. And so yeah, I just thought today we could sit down and kind of go through some of your stories and hear about some of the things that you're excited about and concerned about, in the near and long-term future. But before we get into that, maybe we just start with, who are you, Eric? How did you get here sitting on this call today?
Oh, certainly. Well, thanks, Ari. I appreciate the introduction. When I was a graduate student, I did work in both international relations and in computer science. And at that time, I thought there were going to be in the future more intense connections between the world of international affairs, foreign policy, global governance, globalization in general, and the increasing use of digital networks to bring about and accelerate these connections among nations. I wrote my dissertation on an international, or I created an international law framework for these types of relations, and I've been making a living on it ever since. I had a successful career with high-tech companies in the private sector. I also did a stint in government as a political appointee in the State Department and as a full-time academic as well. I retired from American University as a department chair and president of the faculty in 2022. And now I'm devoting my time to consulting for the U.S. State Department in cybersecurity and engaging in a number of other projects that I'm interested in pursuing.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really, really grateful that you're joining me today. I feel like you are one of the most knowledgeable human beings about many, many things that I've ever met. And so I think we're all lucky to kind of get to hear what's going on inside Eric Novotny's brain. So I wanted to start it off, the crux of this show is kind of getting into, we all feel like that the current version of the internet and the current version of how we feel safe on the internet just doesn't quite feel right. It everywhere we turn, there's a new way of being attacked. There's a new way of everybody stealing your money. There's a new way of somebody, misinterpreting what you said or taking what you said and turning it into something that the world is offended by. So I just want to start kind of small and personal of like, can you think of a time when you had some kind of interaction via digital communication where you weren't sure that the person you were talking to actually was the person that they said they were on the other end, or where you just where you second guessed a digital interaction of some kind?
I've had a few experiences like this, although over time you learn to be a little bit more careful.
Yes, it's true.
But I recall distinctly in the early days of message boards and chat boards and so forth. It was a novelty, and there were a lot of people who made out to be business executives or someone else of importance or age, and you realized at some point that you were talking to a 12-year-old student in Ann Arbor, Michigan, or something.
Yeah.
So, I think, at least personally, I learned very quickly that an online avatar or handle or pseudonym
Mm.
was going to serve a purpose of not only identifying people, but also masking their identity. As far as, being taken in by someone where I didn't know who they were, I have had a couple of instances where I've gotten telephone calls at my home from someone claiming to be from the Justice Department or the FBI or the IRS, making demands on revealing personal information, or telling me that I was in trouble or owed money or something, or that
Mm.
my nephew was in jail and I needed to bail them out. And of course, again, you realize very quickly, but sometimes in the first few moments, there's an implicit trust when you pick up the phone and listen to a human voice. And that's how people get scammed. They get drawn in by these things. And
Yeah.
it's very unfortunate, but it persists today.
It persists, and I think, I don't want to lead the witness, but certainly with the advent of AI, I think these problems become exponentially more terrifying, because the person calling you now sounds like maybe your nephew, right?
Correct.
The
You,
person
you,
calling you
you,
sounds like your grandma.
yeah, you can impersonate or mimic a voice.
Yeah.
You could do that by calling the actual intended victim, getting a voice recording, and then playing it back through an AI algorithm.
Yeah.
So certainly that's the case. I would also add to that an AI augmentation of social engineering of all types,
Mm.
including phishing, particularly spear phishing, in which AI could be used to gather much more coherent details about your personal life or the personal lives of others that are connected to you through social media, and then used as in a credential stuffing operation to gain credibility.
Yeah.
Particularly if it's interactive, like, how did you know this? Are you really there?
Right. Right. Being able to answer
Where,
questions.
where you say you are, and be
Right.
able then to answer questions on the fly.
Yeah.
That in the past, the capabilities of automated systems were not able to do.
Right. To basically be, getting a query, the AI receives the query in real time and is able to answer the query in as much time as feels natural.
Right. So, for example, you have a situation where many phishing messages contain grammatical errors
Right.
because they're done they're written in a mother tongue different from the one that's sent to the target.
Hmm.
And so, over time, through machine learning, it became easier to spot those kinds of things, or to spot British spelling as opposed to U.S. English spelling. But with AI, you can clean that up pretty effectively, and you can make it sound much more
Cheaply,
intelligent.
I think, more importantly.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think there are definitely threats there that if they haven't expressed themselves already, will definitely show up.
I want to, just kind of zooming a little bit out. You're someone who has you've done some really cool things in the world. You've been like you said, you've been a political appointee. You've been, the head of the faculty at AU. You've worked at high tech companies. This word kind of like fake news gets thrown around quite a bit, or we might call it mis or disinformation. Have you ever been affected by misinformation or disinformation or fake news, whether it's about you or whether it's about somebody you cared about or somebody you were working with? And kind of like, just, do you have a sort of a personal anecdote related to like the proliferation of something like this?
Right. I don't have a personal example that concerns, say, for example, a member of my family or a close colleague, although I have been solicited by emails from
Mm.
friends of mine who have since passed away, which is a rather
Yeah.
unnerving experience.
Yep.
On the other hand, I think today one has to be constantly on guard. In the strategic communication course, graduate course that I used to teach at AU, we used to have a number of exercises with the students where they would be shown, say, a 30-second video, and they'd have to go in and find out what happened, where it happened, why it happened, what it was.
Hmm.
Uh, and they were required to time themselves onto how long it took them searching on the internet or in the library using any resources they wanted to actually get a satisfactory answer to the questions that I posed to them.
Hmm.
And in many instances, looking at a 30-second video of a public event took hours.
Right.
So what happens with misinformation or disinformation is that it is in an era where we have an abundance of factual information or factoids or things that pass as factoids or isolated pieces of information. It becomes much more difficult to dig and to actually ground truth or verify a claim that
Right.
doesn't quite seem right. We have lost in some cases the traditional intermediaries that we used to have that would kind of clean things up, or you trusted to
The
clean
the
things.
the institutions is what you're referring to, I would imagine. Yeah.
Lost those institutions to do that, and so the burden is placed much more on you. I'll give you two examples of this. One was an infamous document that surfaced in the 1980s called the Northwoods document. Many people have never heard of it.
Hmm.
But it apparently was a leaked memo from the Pentagon about how the US was going to conduct a false flag operation to shoot down an American airliner over Cuba and use it as an excuse for going to war. Now, that's a pretty drastic thing to do. It was done in the Kennedy administration. And scholars have debated back and forth. I was rather surprised once when I assigned a textbook in one of my courses, only to find that the author mentioned the Northwoods document in passing and thought it was absolutely genuine. There are many other sources in the academic community that have done analysis on it and condemn it as a fake or as Russian disinformation. I
Right.
suppose we'll never really know. But it's those kinds of things that sometimes turn themselves into memes
Right.
or to some accepted corpus of knowledge when they haven't really been verified to the extent that we would like them or really should verify them. A contemporary example of that is a very strange draft of an executive order that was apparently leaked during the Trump administration that ordered the Secretary of Defense to seize all voting machines in the United States in the 2020 election.
Right.
And it cited foreign interference under a national security memorandum, actually two of them, 13 and 21, which are highly classified documents which deal with offensive cyber operations by the U.S. military. No one has ever admitted to writing that thing.
Mm.
It's quite possible that it could be a fake because it's rather poorly written.
Hmm.
Although one says that there may have been people inside the Trump administration that wrote it in haste or didn't really have the full story, and was leaked by Politico, and now it's there,
Yeah.
in the Internet Archive forever and always. And we really don't know what the source was, what the context was, if it is disinformation or not.
Right. But I
And
think your point is like whether or not at a certain point, whether or not something is disinformation or misinformation or it's provable, what it the function is that sort of like the um the pipes of our society get clogged with confusion. You know, when we don't know what's real, when we can't trust our institutions, when we aren't able to discern fact from fiction, that's when things start to break.
Right.
You had an earlier point that you know, kind of the onus is on us now, um, you know, rather than our institutions, to be able to tell what's real, to kind of figure out who to trust. Um, I think part of that also, though, you know, is kind of this idea of what feels safe to share online. You know, I personally, like, I share almost nothing. I have a Twitter, I have a, you know, I have an Instagram. I find myself almost never putting information out. Like, I consume information, but I find myself, I don't put it out very often. So I'm curious, you know, have you, is there a time when you've shared something over the internet, whether it's an email or a text or whatever, and had a regret about it, or a moment where you felt like your intention was somehow miscommunicated because of the medium by which you were communicating, or the shortcomings of the medium by which you were communicating?
Yeah, I can think of a couple of examples, but to your general point first, whether you're producing information, user-generated content, or you're consuming it, and you're faced with this broad uh, blast of
Yeah.
information that you have to sort through, intermediaries that are not so neutral or balanced or ethical surface as a result. And
Yeah.
so people then gravitate to an ideological or a religious or ethnic, could be anything, space that they find comfortable.
Yeah.
And that
Where
creates,
people agree with them.
right. Yeah. And that's, number one, it creates a false sense of trust in many ways. And it also creates basically an echo chamber where, so people feel increasingly, I think, willing to share, with that context of like-minded individuals, as opposed to posting something that goes through the entire internet. I've had this happen, after a long career. You probably have written hundreds of thousands of emails, right?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes they're taken inappropriately by the recipient. Two things about that in my own personal experience. One is that I had an instance where um, I was questioning a particular organization, and in the company I was working for. When I replied, it went to one of the executives in that organization, who didn't take it very well. From that experience, I learned never to put the recipients on an email message until you're done drafting the email message. That's number one. Make sure. And I've seen it many times. I've gotten emails from
Yeah.
people who were intended for somebody else, or that I wasn't really supposed to see, but I was on the original distribution list. A second instance, and again, another piece of advice, is when I lived in Europe for 6 years, where I ran the European operations for Hughes Electronics. And we had an instance where very, very serious flaw in a highly sophisticated communication system. It wasn't a security issue, it was a performance issue. And it became, it was a project that I had worked on for a very, very long time. We finally were successful. And then all of a sudden, when the customer turned the switch, it was a mess. And so I wrote an email back to the president of the company. I said, "This is really serious. We're going to look terrible. We've got to get a team over there and fix this thing right away. Because it's going to be obvious to millions of people very quickly that something's wrong."
Yeah.
And one of the lawyers got on my case over that and said, oh, you've admitted guilt and liability.
Right. But you put it in writing and not, yeah.
Put it in writing and so forth, when, I thought I was doing the right thing as a responsible executive. And it turned out that that could have done damage. It didn't in the end do damage to the company, but it could. So I guess what I learned from that experience was, and again, I was much younger when I was much younger and earlier in my career, is that write the email message as if your worst adversary were going to read it and make something of it.
That is a rule to live by.
Yeah, so that it's not if, but when it falls into enemy hands, it will be defensible.
I will definitely. I think that's one I will bring with me wherever I go.
And I've followed that rule, and it's worked pretty well. I've received emails, particularly when I was head of the faculty at AU, from other faculty members that were not so kindly and but I learned very quickly not to send flamers back in flame.
Yeah, my wife always gives me the advice of, write the letter that you want to send and then put it away.
Right.
And then write something the next day.
Exactly. That's an Abraham Lincoln.
There you go.
Right. He knew what he was doing.
He had some idea of what he was doing. Continuing to kind of zoom out, I know that you are always paying attention to trends. Even I was taking your, the title of this show is called The Green Internet. And it's called The Green Internet because 13 years ago, when I was in your class, I think as a sophomore in college, you introduced to us this idea of the red internet and the green internet, and how in the future, the red internet is going to be, you're not going to know who's who, you're not going to know what's what, and it's all going to be AI generated. The green internet is going to be safe, it's going to be authenticated, it's going to be validated, you're going to know who you're talking to. So I know that you're kind of always thinking years ahead. So as you look at kind of the landscape now, what do you think are kind of the most important trends that are going to be shaping the future of identity, safety? Are there technological advancements you're kind of keeping your eye on? Are there legal decisions? Like, if somebody wants to kind of look at the future, what should we be paying attention to?
I think in terms of the analogy of the red and green internet, the idea that you would have one part of the internet which would be the Wild West, and it would be a complete free-for-all, and another one that would have identity and authentication and would lack probably some anonymity, is an idea that surfaced a number of times. Jonathan Zittrain from the Harvard Law School raised an analogy like that in his book, The Future of the Internet and How to Stop It, where he also predicted that instead of this free, flat architecture, that big, powerful intermediaries would move in and basically create an oligarchy, which had happened. Dan Geer was another writer who looked at how to enforce a legal regime to kind of clean things up, which I can go into if you want to. But today, most people, I think, are more concerned about the technological advances that may threaten a free, open internet. And the obvious ones are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and of course, biometric identity or identity management in general. That would include technologies like digital watermarks, which some people believe are going to be absolutely necessary and more widespread. And there are others who think that they too can be spoofed, or falsified. So there's a lot of controversy and because many of these technologies, and particularly quantum computing, have not been fully developed in a applied practical way, we end up speculating about things where we don't really know how they're going to shake out.
Right. It's like everybody's freaked out. They're like, oh my gosh, quantum's going to break encryption forever and we're never going to have anything ever again. And yet we don't, we don't know yet. We just don't know yet.
That's right. Now, I mean, you could use the same analogy today, and you could say that, I turn on my newsfeed every morning, and I just get a litany of cyber crimes that are being committed, data breaches and so forth, and financial crimes around the world. And you think to yourself, well, these are hundreds, thousands, but yet somehow we all sit down at our keyboard and we do our online banking and we buy things from Amazon, and somehow it all works. So, so while there is a lot of sensationalism about cybercrime, and I don't mean to dismiss it or dismiss the fact that there are huge cybersecurity vulnerabilities in today's world, somehow it still works. What I believe will probably be the first emergent trend will be that the internet will look more and more like an automated network where you have bots talking to bots, or bots trying to talk to people. And the human element will be driven further and further away, whether it's auctions for advertising or algorithms that are used for push advertising, or websites that are constructed out of nowhere on the fly that seem legitimate. It seems to me that the internet is more and more going to look like a forest of artificial persona, and less by humans, and less having the ability to know whether you are really interacting with a human or not.
I mean, and to that end, like, and it might be sort of in this vein or a related vein, when you are a security mind first and foremost, like when you're thinking about the next 5 years, 10 years of like, okay, what is the thing that kind of freaks you out the most? That's like, oh my goodness, like I don't know how we're going to solve this problem, or this is the thing that's like feels like the most important problem for us to devote our resources to solving.
Yeah, I guess I would have to put, at least if I were to make a list, at the top of the list, an erosion of trust, because when you have a situation where identity is more and more difficult to verify, because the resources it takes to verify it are greater, then the authenticity of information, such as deep fakes, for example, become much harder to ground truth, because you and I, as ordinary users, are not going to have the tools to do that. And we may have to rely on intermediaries to do it. And those may not always be trustworthy. So that's kind of one trend. The complementary trend now is that your behavior at your keyboard is increasingly predictable, not only by AI, but I mean, even by ordinary machine learning algorithms, because of the habits that you engage in, the websites you visit, the style of writing, the length of your email messages, the keystrokes that and speed between keystrokes that you use can also be used to identify you. Individually, unless you are targeted by a law enforcement or intelligence agency, that's probably not as important as the fact that these kinds of things can be aggregated, and then you can be shipped or pushed information that is supposed to push one of your buttons,
right?
So to speak.
Right.
Now,
to nudge you in a particular direction.
right now, two large platforms, Reddit and at the time it was when it was called Facebook, were engaged in experiments without any knowledge of its users to actually try and create emotional, extreme um, forms of anxiety. And both these cases have been documented and in the Facebook case brought up to the National Academy of Sciences and rousingly criticized. But I'm sure that this kind of thing persists and that many of
I mean,
these
look at TikTok. I'm sure TikTok is doing this like.
That's right, and they've learned their lesson, and they're not making they're not disclosing it certainly, but not making it known that they actually do this in a very, very insidious way. So it now, because of that erosion of trust and the supposition that these kinds of things will be repeated in the few cases that have come to light, it's like, well, Novotny's a conspiracy theorist because he thinks everybody's spying on him, right?
Yeah.
That may be true, maybe not, but certainly, if you are on the internet and you are any kind of user, that whether it's in commerce or entertainment or political activism or what have you, that information is going to be captured and probably used in a way that's not in your best interest.
Yeah, it's going to be used, to either get you to buy something or believe something or do something. It's kind of the.
Right. Yeah, I think the most frightening types are where I'm in a room with a member of my family and there's an Alexa terminal sitting there and we talk about buying a new car.
Right.
And then when I go back, I turn on Safari and I start browsing random homepages and I get ads for automobiles.
Yeah.
So now, am I being paranoid? I don't know, but it's awfully strange that that kind of connection happens. Or the other experience I've had is where I've left on some site, say an item in my shopping cart, and I haven't checked out. I had to go do something and it came back later. And when I get to another website, I get pushed ads for that same item. Have you forgotten that you wanted to buy this?
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, no, it is kind of like I think that the anxiety that you're talking about is like that we are increasingly operating in the red internet and we're still thinking that we live in the green internet.
That's right, because the consequences haven't really been felt individually, unless you were in an identity theft.
Right, unless you've had your identity stolen, like it really hasn't affected.
Right, lost money in a scam or
Right,
something like that. But these types of behavioral techniques that are used for e-commerce and for advertising can easily be repurposed for political purposes.
Oh yeah, and I mean, that definitely this is January 25th that we're having this conversation, and there's going to be a presidential election in 10 months, and I think that's the real concern here, is that what we're talking about is going to be deployed for some pretty nefarious purposes potentially.
Sure.
I don't want to end on a note like that though. So of all of the things, we've talked about some of the challenges of the ecosystem, some of the scary parts of the technological evolution here. But what keeps you hopeful? What keeps you excited about the future and keeps you excited? Like I think you and I share that we believe technology is ultimately a great gift for humanity, and that there is a way to sort of have technology serve humans and not have it sort of make us more scared and alone and divided. So what gives you hope?
That's
are there people, are there projects, are there ideas that give you hope?
There are theorists that I've studied and have kind of been companions of mine for decades.
Hmm.
Jacques Ellul, the famous French philosopher, wrote about the technological society decades ago,
Hmm.
and his prediction was that it has an inertia all of its own, and an ethos and a logic all of its own. I have come to not agree with that thesis. I think in the end, the humans are actually still in charge. I mean, it's the analogy of, if Skynet wants to blow up the world, we can always pull the plug, I guess.
Hmm.
Even though in the movie that didn't happen. Um,
Hmm.
On the other hand, I think a lot of these technologies can be used. Let's talk about the technologies first. I think machine learning and AI can be, again, easily used to actually detect or recognize traffic that is bot traffic or that is malicious or non-human traffic.
Yep.
There's a famous article written a few years ago where scholars tried to produce internet traffic that looked authentic but was machine generated. And the idea was to flood the internet with a lot of garbage where you had valuable messages that could be smuggled in with them. And it turned out, and again, it's still an open controversy, but one of the conclusions was that that's really hard to do.
Right.
That you can really detect this when it is inauthentic, and that may be one way to, if you're interested in policing the red internet, to do that. But it's also a way of keeping things out of the green internet.
Right.
I think there will probably be better verification that will probably be done at the loss of anonymity at some point, although it's possible that you could disclose your true identity to a trusted intermediary, and that could be used as a verification mechanism for multiple platforms.
And then, and you kind of have pseudonymity, publicly.
Publicly, right?
Yeah.
But you have authenticity, with,
Right.
it's sort of like, why do I use PayPal? I use it because I don't have to disclose the details of my credit card and other
Right.
personal information. The only thing the vendor needs to know is where to deliver my stuff.
Right. They need your email address,
Yeah,
or
sometimes not even that, right?
Yeah.
And I, would trust PayPal to do that because it's in one place, and and if it's somebody I haven't ever worked with before,
Right.
and I'm now forced to trust them because I have to disclose that information to buy what I want, not a good thing. And that's how people get ripped off. So again, if you can have an intermediary that does build in much better security, I'm not saying that it's 100%, but much more reliable, that now becomes a value-added prospect. The other part of this debate is we sort of lost the whole issue with liability and net neutrality and Section 230 issues. And it's strange to me that that's dropped out of sight a bit because it hasn't gone away and the law was never changed.
It's true.
Section 230 is the same as it was when it was written.
Yeah.
There was one Supreme Court case that slapped down the government a bit, Murphy versus Missouri. In the government kind of dictating what some of these social media platforms could do. But we've never really had a definitive reform to the whole net neutrality argument. And doing that would cause massive changes one way or another. You can like them or not.
Right.
But it would have significant alteration to the way we do business on the internet.
Well, and I think, this is getting into a much deeper conversation, but then the question is, is our stock market dependent upon the business models that Section 230 allows for,
Right. I mean, you could easily see a dichotomy where, if you're in the red internet,
Yeah.
um, you can say, I'm not responsible, like 230 says today, I'm not responsible for the content that my users create, transmit, or, impart or receive.
Mm-hmm.
But if I do that, then the law could say, fine, then, if you're going to absolve yourself of responsibility, you can't censor or police anything,
Yep.
anything, or create paywalls, anything
Right.
goes.
Right.
On the other side, you could say, if you're going to censor content and you're going to charge money, and you're going to act as an editorial content
Mm-hmm.
intermediary, then anything that goes over your network, just like in liability and slander law today, you can be held accountable for if you damage somebody.
Yep.
No, and it's to say, fine, like in Let's Make a Deal, you choose door number 1 or door number 2, right? And each of these companies could go their separate ways or have separate organizations that operate in each of those exclusive worlds.
The AT&T of it all.
Correct. No,
Yeah.
and I think that would go a long way, toward this, not complete separation, but this complementarity between red and green that we've been discussing.
Yeah.
It would begin to kind of migrate all of these platforms into one domain or the other.
Right. As opposed to whatever the brown internet that we have today, which is the combination of red and green.
Well, or the red internet thinking, trying to convince you
right.
it's the green internet.
Right. Yeah. The red internet with the green mask on, I guess, is a better is a better analogy. Well, Eric, thank you so much for your time and your effort and your energy here. I know your mind and sort of the way that you see the world has so deeply influenced how I see the world and how I learn and remain curious. So thank you. And I'm excited to continue this conversation offline, and maybe we'll have you back on in 6 months and talk about how the world is an entirely different place.
Happy to do it anytime. Thanks,
Thanks
Ari.
so much, Eric.